Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's session. I'm Catherine Liao, and I have the pleasure of moderating a wonderful conversation that we have prepared for you. Today's conversation is intended to explore what actually happened after the pitch when founders must turn their idea into evidence, adoption, capital, and ultimately patient impact. Our speakers represent three very different points of that journey. EcoHealth won in 2018, the very first health tech competition, AvoMD in 2022, and Polyvascular in 2025, just last year. So this gives us a rare opportunity to examine how these journeys have evolved from early recognition through execution to scale. Jason, Yair, Henry, welcome. I'd now like to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and take us back to the point when you entered the AHA Health Tech competition. Tell us what your company looked like when you entered that competition, and why was the competition relevant to you at that stage? So why don't we go ahead and start with you, Jason?
Well, good morning. Thanks, Catherine, and it's great to be here. So Jason, co-founder, chief business officer at EcoHealth. We are a cardiovascular early detection company bringing the stethoscope into the digital age. We started the company about 13 years ago. Time has really flown by, and since have shipped 750,000 connected stethoscopes. So our devices will capture the heart and lung sounds. They will amplify it for the provider, reduce background noise, but most importantly, pair with a software application that allows the healthcare provider to really engage with digital heart and lung sounds for the first time, to record, save, share, and ultimately analyze using FDA-cleared algorithms. Our team is about 100 folks based in the Bay Area. And yeah, we entered the pitch competition back, I can't believe that was in 2018. And it was a pivotal moment for the company. We had just gotten our first FDA clearance. We were building out our clinical advisory board and scientific advisory board. So it gave us an opportunity to meet some incredible judges. I remember Dr. Robert Harrington at Stanford. Bob was obviously, I think he was either the president at the time or just about to be the president of the AHA. He became a really close mentor and helped us actually get into Stanford StartX, in part because of, and StartX is Stanford's health tech incubator, and part of winning that pitch competition. And so I think just getting visibility within the AHA, meeting some incredible providers, helping to accelerate our path to adoption with entering the Stanford StartX accelerator. And of course, getting to share our story. I think when you're a founder, the most important thing is obviously building great technology and amazing products, but getting the word out there. And the AHA has created a wonderful competition, but really an amplifier for founders like those of us on the call and also just a broader ecosystem.
Great. Thank you for that, Jason. Well, why don't we go to you, Yair?
What's up, everybody? Yair Saperstein. I am CEO and co-founder of Avo, and my background, I'm an internal medicine doc and a clinical informatician, still practicing per diem as a hospitalist. And for me, I started Avo when I was actually in residency. As I was in residency, I was overwhelmed by the amount of information that I was supposed to process and the amount of things that I was supposed to do as a doc, and it was just impossible. Take the cardiology guidelines as a single example of that, but there's just so much that we need to process as we're treating patients. And take inpatient as a simple example, right? Like, I need to figure out across my panel of patients that I'm seeing what to do with them appropriately, and then do all of those things, document it, put it in orders, and so on. What we realized and what I realized at the time is that there is no good way to do it while still staying human. And staying human is the key to giving good care. And what we also realized before AI was cool in medicine is that you can use technology, including AI, inside of the electronic health record in a way that can process not just the patient data, but also the guidelines at once, so that you can understand what you need to do from a clinical standpoint. And this clinical decision support that's embedded inside of the workflow allows for me as a doc to actually have my work, that is rote work, done automatically, my thinking work to be exceptional now because I have it with patient data directly inside of the EHR. And now we started to serve as health systems by allowing for CDI guidelines, the way of framing things, the things that turn to revenue and compliance, to also be considered by the AI in drafting notes and other aspects. And so when we participated in the 2022 pitch competition, really the reason that we won is not just for the ability to take forward the idea, not just for the physician and clinician love that we had at AVO, but also for the ability to truly represent the evidence in a way that makes it practical, because we are using the guidelines now accessed via our AI and brought into the system.
Awesome. Looking forward to hearing more about that. Now off to you, Henry.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Henry Justino. So I'm a co-founder and CEO of Polyvascular, and I'm still a full-time practicing interventional pediatric cardiologist. I founded the company with two engineers to answer an unmet need in kids who have congenital heart defects. As a background, not a lot of medical devices are being developed for children, and we saw a real unmet need that needed to be addressed. And, you know, joining the health tech innovation competition at the AHA a year ago was really an important step for us. It mainly creates that validation that you're not just resonating with people because you're doing something that answers an unmet need, but clinicians and people deeply embedded in the healthcare system can see the value that you're going to bring and can see the impact that this innovation will have. So that was for us a really important turning step. It really improved our conversations with investors, and as they saw this validation come in, and really the journey has obviously was only in November 2025, but even in the last few months, I feel like those conversations have really turned much more favorable as we are now heading into our first significant raise, a Series A raise of $60 million to advance our device. So the device is a transcatheter pulmonary valve. Children to this day who are very young always require open heart surgery to keep replacing heart valves, and the heart valves we give them have very poor durability. Mostly we give kids a homograft valve, which is a human cadaveric valve from another child who died, and we use that in another child who needs congenital heart surgery. And those valves have very poor durability and need to be replaced very frequently, so that some of those kids end up with 3 to 5 open heart surgeries before they're even adults. And if we can provide at least one or more options for catheter-based valve replacement rather than open heart surgery, it's minimally invasive. They can go home the same day or the next day and get back to school, get back to sports, as opposed to healing from open heart surgery, which can take many weeks.
That's really amazing. And maybe we'll continue with you, Henry. And as I kind of carry on the discussion for the folks that have joined us, please leverage the Q&A box to ask any questions that you have of our panelists, and I will insert them throughout the conversation and definitely towards the end of the conversation as well. So Henry, I mean, you are our newest winner and very, very early stage in your pursuits. What was the moment when you decided that this is an unmet need, I have a solution, I have an idea, and I must start a company and go solve for this problem? And take us through when that I flipped for you.
Yeah. I still remember a patient that I was caring for who was a baby who had open heart surgery to repair the heart defect, and part of that included the placement of their first artificial valve, a pulmonary valve from a human donor valve. And that baby ended up having that valve deteriorate so rapidly that within 6 months he needed to go back to open heart surgery again. And it was like a light that went off in my head and said, we have to do better for these babies. This is unbelievable that they go through this huge open heart surgery and then have to go right back in there, sometimes in as little as 6 months. So I've been practicing for about 25 years, and transcatheter heart valves began about 25 years ago, right around the time when I was finishing my fellowship. But they were all directed at adult diseases, and large valves for adult-sized hearts, and really not much for kids. And sometimes, we can shoehorn some of those valves into an older child or an adolescent, but for toddlers and infants, Almost no one is innovating in this space for those needs. So that's where I said, let's do something about this. And what we've come up with is a solution that is a little bit different than what's out there right now. The standard heart valves that are made for delivery by a catheter are all made of animal tissues that are hand sewn onto a metal frame. And then the frame is compressed onto a catheter. It's delivered through the groin and gets up into the heart, and the metal frame is expanded into position to allow the valve to open and close inside the heart. What we've done is we've addressed several of the problems that have plagued some of the existing valve technologies in the solution that we're developing. So one of the problems that's been common is endocarditis, which is a heart valve infection. And by making our valve out of a medical grade polymer rather than by making it out of animal tissues, we believe that we have a solution that will be less prone to endocarditis. Also less prone to what's known as structural valve deterioration, where tissues, animal tissues, our immune system reacts against those. The tissues kind of harden and the valves don't function so well after some time. And this is a particularly problematic situation for younger people. And so as we think of deploying these kind of heart valve technologies into kids, making the valves out of animal tissues just seems to be placing them at risk for that early deterioration of those tissues. So by, again, making it out of a medical grade polymer, we hope to avoid some of those problems. Our company is a little bit unique in that we really started off with a lot of grant funding to get us where we are. And we are now only for the first time really going out for a significant raise now to really translate from all that preclinical work we've done, a lot of benchtop testing, animal work, to then deploy this into a first in-human clinical trial, which we hope to start next year.
And actually, and sure, that's quite the journey, and I imagine quite a long road ahead. Why don't we go over to Yair? Right. What I was wanted to hear from you too around this is that, as a hospitalist, and I'm sure that first of all, you perhaps also have a patient and certainly an idea that similar to Henry on getting the idea started. And I'm really curious to hear is also too is where did the clinical credibility help you, and what did you have to unlearn as a clinician to build a company?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I have a similar question for Henry. Right, like we're both docs, and for me as a hospitalist, certainly there is always this sense of urgency of, okay, well, I got all of these patients to take care of, and I don't have enough time in the day to do it, and I have a family that I have to like take care of and be responsible to also, and all of these priorities compete with each other. And then there I go, like starting a company to try to help with some of these things. But for me personally, it's like, oh, okay, let's add on yet another. So certainly the clinical credibility helped me in being able to start the company and being able to sell the idea of the company both to health systems and to investors because I live it, right? This is solving a problem for me and my friends first. When we started it, we didn't start it as a company. We started it as a solution that would be able to help ourselves. And then, okay, cool. Like this really helps. This is really good. We started it first really as like a true clinical decision support that can lend efficiency, and only recently have we like added in explicitly the things that will help the systems. We've always thought about it, right? Like how do you have all the different stakeholders on board and, uh, you know, driving revenue for systems and the quality components as it's represented in documentation. Of course, we recognized and included as part of it, but this is a later part. Like the whole beginning part was servicing me and my friends, right? So certainly that clinical credibility isn't like, oh, I'm a doctor, I know what I'm doing. It's more, I have domain knowledge of what I'm trying to solve for myself and my buds. And so, like, this is not, I'm trying to sell you something that I don't get. This is, we built it as a product. Oh, I can give you value too. And really, the question, Henry, that I had for you is building software, like the way that I was doing it and the way that I am doing it is, doesn't require quite the same like patience and rigor as when you're building a medical device. And so I wonder like how do you couple that like sense of urgency where it's like you can build and then you see, and now of course we have the safety components in place and we have an evaluation-led framework for our software. But a medical device is like, as you said, you're hoping that it's going to lead to reduced endocarditis, right? It requires all of this like safety work very much upfront and at the forefront. So how do you balance that like sense of urgency with a, slow and patience and rigor mindset that you need to build the medical device part?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gary. I would say first, I've had to temper my enthusiasm and my sense of urgency just because everything seems to take longer than what you think it will take, right? You have an idea and you think within a couple of years we should be having this ready, and it takes a lot longer than that to especially to do it right. And I would say another component to the answer is that I also take my clinical credibility for what it is and use that to benefit the advancement of this innovation. But I also know what I don't know, and I realize where my knowledge gaps are. And so as a clinician, I can bring certain things to the table, but I'm not an engineer and I'm not an experienced medical device executive. And understanding that and knowing that means that we have to kind of come to the table with a lot of humility and say, I don't know everything, but I'm willing to bring in all these people who know a lot more than I do, who can see the blind spots where I'm missing information and help me fill in the gaps and help support the development of this product. So early on, we had two PhD medical and biomedical engineers who were sort of co-founders. And then as soon as we could, with grant funds and so on, we started bringing in consultants with experience in medical device development to really make sure that what we're developing is credible. Because again, what I think could be a good solution, it doesn't result in a practical, engineering sort of solvable engineering problem necessarily. And what an engineer might come up with isn't always clinically applicable or practical. But when we put them together, I think really we have the best of all worlds there.
Cool.
Okay, so then maybe over to Jason. I mean, so you are now 13 years into building Echo, and you've certainly lived through that experience of everything takes longer than what you thought it would take. And also lots of highlight like both the highs and the lows of entrepreneurship. What did you believe about the company, the market, or the path to adoption at the time when you were going through really the AHA health tech fundraising and later to be and later those beliefs actually proved to be wrong?
Well, yeah, first off, Henry, really resonate with what you were talking about around bringing subject matter experts to the table and that experience as a founder. So would love to chat more about that. But yeah, when we started Echo, I mean, really the fundamental clinical problem that we were addressing was the underdiagnosis of heart disease in general, but with auscultation and the stethoscope, really looking at structural heart disease. So another area of overlap there, Henry. But and the whole premise was, let's obviously build this data set of heart sounds. Let's use data science to help automatically analyze sounds that are recorded with the stethoscope and then offer that interpretation to the provider in real time during the exam. But the first chapter of the company was just digitizing the stethoscope. We had to take something that was analog, build a medical device, get the medical device through the FDA. Then we had to collect this really gold standard data set of heart sounds and lung sounds. And by the time we were really ready to come to market with our first version of our AI, it was 2020. And of course, in March of 2020, the world changed on a dime. Healthcare went largely virtual. And the broader healthcare ecosystem was much less focused on early detection of structural heart disease and valve disease, and much more focused on PPE, keeping providers safe, and obviously caring for millions of patients with COVID. And so one of the things that became a really quick lesson for us was with the digital stethoscope, the digitization of the heart sounds and lung sounds via Bluetooth, and then being able to stream those to AirPods under protective gear became overnight, the most important feature of our solution. And so when we started a company really focused on early heart disease detection, we actually became a telehealth and a PPE protective solution for hearing heart and lung sounds in a dime. And so to both make it through those years as a company, but also really meet our customers and our providers where they needed us, we really leaned into the virtual listening of heart and lung sounds and wireless listening of heart and lung sounds for a couple of years while we managed through the pandemic. And so no one could have predicted that, but a lesson to founders to pivot to where the market is pulling you And then, of course, now as things have sort of restabilized to some extent, are obviously very focused again on structural heart disease detection and low EF. But there was a couple of years there where that was just not the main use case for our product.
That's awesome. Thank you
That's
for
terrific.
sharing that. Yeah. So then over to Yair. What was the first meaningful development? I mean, as you are now deploying into clinics, and thank you for sharing just the other day that you worked an overnight shift and doing patient intakes. Kind of after the competition, at which point did you get the sense of, hey, this has materially changed our trajectory as a startup?
There's a whole bunch of different points that you feel it. One point was when we added in our first person outside of the co-founders. It's like, oh wow, we're growing the team. Closed our first customer. It's like, okay, somebody's actually paying for it. Got our positive studies back and then continually building up the positive studies. It's like, okay, cool. I had a gestalt that it worked. Now I see that it worked. Where the studies that we did were genuinely like, we're hoping that this will come out positive, but we really want to see like the data's coming from the systems that we're working with. Wow, like we are showing improved outcomes and improved efficiency. Cool. The fundraisers that we did. So we did a seed, we did a pre-seed, a seed, and a Series A. And so at each of those points, I say companies have seasons. And so there's different styles, different leadership styles, different things that are needed, shifting even in the way that you can talk about the company. And so each of those have lended significant oomph to the work that we're doing and really were meaningful in ways of showing me and feeling, okay, cool. This is changing our trajectory as we are continuing forward on to our North Star, but in ways that were dictated by the market and by our growth, Jason, as you say, which resonates well. The parable I sometimes give is I imagine myself standing on the side of a river as logs are floating down, and that's the market. And then you have to choose which of those logs are you going to hop onto and which of those logs do you want to let pass by. And you don't need to hop onto every log. And you do need to know where you're going when the paths diverge. So you need to have that North Star for directionality. You need to choose which of the logs you're hopping onto. You need to choose which people you're hopping onto the logs to with and grab whichever ones you want or not judiciously so that you can continue to build and grow and deliver in the way that you need to.
And then the pivot is then jumping off to another log
A
too.
hundred
And that also,
percent.
yeah,
A
being
hundred
ready to do
percent.
that. Um, and perhaps then over to you, Henry. I mean, what became possible since you've just won, right? You're in the middle of fundraising right now. Where were you in your founder journey, pre-competition and post-competition?
So pre-competition, one thing that's a little bit unique about polyvascular is that we've been able to grow the company almost entirely with non-dilutive grants. So I know we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we've raised over $6 million in non-dilutive grants. So that came through some foundation grants, small competitions, winning medical device competitions, things like that, 25,000 at a time, things like this. And then eventually STTR, SBIR, and phase 1 and 2, and now currently we have another $3 million SBIR phase 2B grant that we're in, which is the one that translates to, the clinical arena. So, until the competition, it was really all about just grants, continuing to apply for grants. And the reason is that it's tougher in the medical device space when you're dealing with pediatrics. The market is smaller, and there's a perception that the return on investment won't be the same, and that you may not just the investors are a little bit less interested in this space in general. Most of them say it's wonderful what you're doing for children. This is great, but we need to invest where we're going to make our 10x return, and this may not be it. Now, in reality, it also takes a lot less investment into a company to get a pediatric device to market. And the reason for that is that the clinical trials are less burdensome. There just aren't going to be, tens of thousands of patients that are going to need this therapy. And that's the downside, is the market is small, but the upside is the clinical trial is small, manageable, nimble, and so we can get to market and with less investment. So with that story, we've been able to talk to investors and now have a group of investors that are not just mission aligned with what we want to do for kids, but also see the return potential there. And it's all about just being very honest about the market right up front, saying that it is a small market, but a very great unmet need, and that there is the potential for an adult market as well with the technology that we're developing to solve some adult heart valve issues that exist in the market there as well, but not necessarily focusing on pivoting straight to an adult because we've been asked, why don't you just make the next greatest adult aortic valve or something like that? And we're very mission focused on trying to get this solved for kids first, and then with that we will then sort of address other problems down the road. But we're staying on firmly on this log to really advance the care that the kids need first.
Awesome. Speaking of and using that log analogy, right? So Jason, you've jumped off probably different logs and seeing different opportunities, especially during the COVID pivots. What did the company require of you in that kind of first phase of founding to FDA clearance to kind of initial commercialization to where you are now, having gone through that growth period at running a 100-person company? Tell us a little bit more about that.
I am really liking this log analogy. I'm thinking there's like a video game here. It's kind of like Frogger for founders.
Frogger.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But maybe I'll use a slightly different analogy. I don't know if you've seen these like music repeaters where you play an instrument and they kind of play a bar and then they go to the next instrument and they all kind of come together to make a song. And I think in the early days of being a founder, you're kind of playing a bar on the guitar and you're going to the piano and then the all kind of comes together. But you have to know a little bit how to play each instrument or string it together with consultants, but you're wearing just so many different hats. And then as the company grows, the really only way to succeed is to bring in subject matter experts and empower them to really kind of be the best guitar player, be the best piano player. But now all of a sudden you have a band and you got to pull them all together. And I think, one of the hardest pivots as a founder is going from that DNA of, okay, I need to sort of be able to do enough of everything to be able to keep things moving forward, but then have that humbleness to say, but I'm not the best guitar player. I'm not the best piano player. I'm not the best, but I know this business and this problem and this customer set and certainly have a seat at the table. But as the team grows, I've just been so humbled and honored to work with some of the best scientists and engineers and commercial folks. And now my job is to really anchor to the vision, keep us kind of all working together, and then hopefully create some really great sounding music at the end of it. So that's kind of the big lesson.
I love that. We have logs and music kind of coming together.
Jason, can we play music on the logs together?
We can. I like that. That's the final stage is you have to play
now
guitar on the log. Yeah, that's the final level of the game.
Jason, you've been like obviously crushing it at Echo. I assume everybody on here has already heard of Echo or uses an Echo. And so really my question is like, as you've been playing that music or with the band, right? Not every performance is perfect or not every instrument in is perfect. Like, what is the worst decision or the worst thing that you did that you can talk about that you made in those 13 years that everybody on here would benefit from understanding to not make that same mistake?
Ooh, I like it. I think I'm going back a long time here. I'm going back over a decade. But I think particularly in the hardware space, founders often like to do pre-orders. There's a lot of excitement and you're 6 months from coming to market and you think everything's in order and so you launch this pre-order on your website. And I've coached a lot of founders not to do this because there's nothing more stressful than having to bring a new device to market, whether it's a med device or not a med device. But what makes it more stressful is if things slip a couple of weeks and you have people that have already purchased your product and having to respond to hundreds of people telling them that there's a delay, layering that on, and really what you're getting is just a couple weeks head start on your go-to-market. So my recommendation is to steer away from pre-orders, get your product to market, feel really good, and then open the storefront versus try to drum up, show that there's demand for the product and, show your investors that you have people already willing to buy it. And then you're just creating unnecessary pressure. So that was very, very early on. We did a pre-order and things slipped a couple of weeks and we were having to manage that, and never again have we done a hardware pre-order. And now 750,000 later, we have our shipping times on lock, but in the early days, the shipping was a challenging one.
Cool.
I need to compare notes with you, Jason, around freight forwarding and some of that
Yes, yes.
after the call.
Yeah.
So at this point, I thank you, yeah, for kicking us off on what I call a founder asking founders, right? Because the fun thing is really hearing the questions that you have for each other. So yeah, you guys started, but maybe I'll go to you, Jason, on your question for one of our panelists or both.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Henry, I guess I'll direct this at you, and you hit on this a little bit, but the capital required for a medical device is often, particularly class three, is much more significant than class two or lower risk devices. And the time to market can be a little longer than the traditional sort of VC um, commercial paths. Can you just share a little bit about like what you're hearing from investors that invest in this type of technology in terms of the capital that you'll probably need to raise to get through the trials, but then just more broadly, how you all are thinking about it in the earliest stages?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. I would say in general, pediatric medical devices are not super attractive to VC investment in general. There may be exceptions, but it's a fact that you need to look for capital elsewhere to start. And so that will be angels and friends and family and those kinds of things, grants, all of those things to really de-risk the product. Our thought was that, rather than going to one of the large medical device manufacturers and saying, look at this great idea we have on the back of a napkin. Why don't we develop this valve for children and that sort of thing? And they would say, yeah, well, that could take $100 million to develop. And, how many are we going to sell? And okay, no thanks. Instead, we thought, let's de-risk this as much as possible, advance the product to either a clinically ready or near clinically ready product, and then have those conversations with those strategics. And by having all those grant funds, it provides not just the validation, but the money that we need to keep advancing forward. And now I believe we've done that. We've taken the device and put it into animals, done chronic animal studies. We've been able to bring in incredibly capable people with industry experience who have overseen medical trials in animals of heart valves, and then see our valve come out of an animal and say, I've never seen a valve look better. Like it hasn't deteriorated. This is amazing what you have here. That sort of validation from real industry experts has been incredibly helpful. And so now we're ready now to sort of do that raise and come to the clinical arena with our valve. The investors that mostly have been interested have been private investors right now, and so some family offices and some private investors, some angel groups, things like that. Those are the places to start, I would say, in the space I'm in. And you're right,
Yep.
it's because there's a long delay between ideation and product ready when it's a medical device. The regulatory hurdles are substantial, and a class 3 device, which means a permanently implantable device like this, is the highest regulatory burden you can have. So you have to do a lot of work up front and sink in thousands of hours of work and a lot of money before you're even generating any revenue. And that's where things are a little bit different from, let's say, a software product where or a software enabled product where you might be able to generate revenue early, iterate on your software, iterate on your hardware, keep generating revenue, keep advancing. A medical device is not going to go through numerous iterations. Each one is a new application to the FDA, new clinical trials. You really got to get it right and launch it, when it's ready to go and have done all the work ahead of time.
What's amazing, what I'll say, Henry, is what you've done with 6 million in non-dilutive capital, and I don't imagine many years of your time and your team's time would have taken 50 to $100 million to do an investment for many of the big players, maybe more, honestly.
That's actually
Just
a
the
good point.
efficiency of capital.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jason. And we have been told that by some of the large medical device manufacturers. They're like, wow, you've got this into chronic animal studies, then all this benchtop testing and all of this work. patent,
Oh yeah.
filings, all of the things that you need to do, and you've done it with about $6 million. We have projects in house that have been 10, $15 million in and have not achieved what you've achieved, and it's a testament to the hard work of really committed people on the team that want to see this become a reality and that have really rolled up their sleeves, worked really hard, a lot of sweat equity in there, and hopefully it will translate to a meaningful solution that comes to market.
Absolutely.
All right, so Henry, what question do you have for one of our panelists?
Yeah, I would ask a question of Jason and Yair, actually. Since both of your innovations have AIs baked into the solution itself, that's a large component of how the innovation works. How do you protect your innovation from competition, given that AI is becoming increasingly ubiquitous? Many people can develop those capabilities. How do you protect that market? How do you have those conversations with investors, to transmit that belief that you've created a segment of the market that you can capture and relatively protect for yourself against other competitors?
I think I can kick it off here and then hand it off to you. But just at the highest level, I think there's certainly kind of first mover advantage and time to market. Although really what you want is a data moat. And for Echo, that is our algorithms are trained off of the largest kind of digital heart sound and lung sound data set. But to even get a digital heart and lung sound data set, you need a digital stethoscope. So large academic centers, they're sitting on millions of ECGs and millions of echocardiograms. So they actually don't have digital heart and lung sounds because all the stethoscopes in their field today are analog. And so for us, where we really see an opportunity to kind of continue to innovate is having the heart sounds and lung sounds digitized, working with academic centers to then develop data sets of gold standard echocardiography that are married to the actual sound so that we can train really great algorithms. But that competitive mode is really the size of the data set and that it has to be collected with a digital stethoscope. And that is then from our actual hardware. So having that sort of end-to-end, the algorithms are trained off of data from our devices, and that marriage between the two is really the differentiator.
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah.
For us, I would say that there are really two primary ways of deploying AI in hospitals. One is a rules engine that's going to run thousands of if-then checks. And the second is machine learning models, right? Which is like pattern matching against millions of past charts and flag documentation gaps, or, it's heart sounds, whatever it is, but it's like a machine learning model that's going to pattern check or pattern match. And then, regardless, after things are pattern matched, then somebody has to do something with it. Avo's approach is different. We built a reasoning harness. So we have a team of physician authored AI agents that work through a patient the way that a clinician does. So it ingests the full chart, applies the actual clinical criteria and guidelines that we use, reasons iteratively across a patient's stay, for example, and then each agent's output feeds the next. And the harness reasons in two blended layers at once. There's the clinical layer that's driving the right care decision, and the revenue and quality layer that's ensuring that the diagnoses, the severity, specificity, right, all the stuff that ties to revenue and billing are going to land in the node so that it's defensible to any payer audit as a byproduct of care at the point of care. So there's no retrospective CDI queries or something like that. But to build this, we required 5 clinical informatician physicians who spend their day translating medical decision making into a form that AI itself can execute and harnessing AI into this form that clinicians will actually adopt. And that is hard, right? You can swap in a better model or a different model, and you're not going to be able to get clinicians to love it while simultaneously achieving what systems need, while simultaneously allowing for better outcomes to be achieved.
Wow, that's a tremendous amount of work you've put into this and thought. Yeah, that's great.
Well, what I hear is actually really from both of you, Jason and Yair, is really data is the moat, right? It's the AI effectively. It's a really smart if then, and just modeling based on and taking actions based on the data that it's trained on. And so the question is, how do you find that differentiated data sources or data creation to then really build that differentiated AI product that can make a difference?
Yeah, and I would
So
add,
as you,
like, I
yeah.
would add, think of AI as a technology, not as the end all be all, right? So it's like, oh, other people are using AI also. Okay, for what and how, right? It's like, oh, other people are using computers, so aren't they going to take away what you did with a computer? It depends what you're doing and how, right? It's a technology that is harnessed.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
it's great. Well, before we go into Q&A, I like to do something that's sort of called a lightning round, right? Where that I'll ask a question. You guys basically give a quick answer that's, a couple words or a very, very short sentence. Are you guys ready? And then what we'll do is probably kind of go through the round of order-wise will be Jason, Yair, and Henry, and then we're just going to go through that. All right, question number one. Since this is about life post competition, if you've gone through, all of you have gone through many startup pitches, pitched a lot, and such. Kind of reflecting back, what was the one thing you would remove from your original pitch competition or competition deck?
We should. I think our deck was too long. We had way too many slides, and you get on there, and then you end up only having time to do two or three. So I think keeping it high level, the mission, the vision, and what we're building versus getting into a lot of the technical detail.
I wish I could remember 2022. I could barely remember yesterday.
that's
How
a
about you,
fair
Henry?
answer.
That's a great
Um,
Yeah.
answer.
I think I agree with Jason. My tendency might be to be a little too wordy on the scientific background behind everything, and maybe keeping those as backup slides for, answering questions and not necessarily having them all in there right from the start.
Awesome. All right, question number two. What is the most overrated startup milestone?
Oof. Every milestone's important, but overrated. It's like, we take all the milestones we can get. But I do think that um, the seed round is what you need to get off is the green light. And oftentimes it's celebrated and should be celebrated. It's a massive milestone, but that's when the work, so often needs to start. And I think I think that may be one of the more overrated parts of the startup journey.
Um, I would give a similar answer, which is any milestone that people think that work is going to end. So I would say closing a funding round for the same reason that people think, oh, I did it. No, you just started.
You just started.
Like,
Yeah,
get ready for it to get harder, right? Like,
exactly.
so I would say it's overrated for that reason, because a lot of times people are like, oh, I'm just trying to achieve this and then I'm good. No, 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 not at all. You're trying to achieve this so that you can now climb the next mountain.
I agree with that. I would say in our case, because our funding has been really almost entirely grant based, getting a grant is great. I mean, you have a lot of validation. You have reviewers that scored your grant really well, and it's a great milestone to have. But it's just the beginning of all this hard work you got to do and do it in time, and then there are inevitable delays in there that slow you down. So yeah, I would say that can be viewed by some as a bit of an overrated milestone.
Well, then maybe let's flip the coin a little bit. What is the most underrated milestone in a startup or a startup?
I would say getting a committed customer who is paying you, because that is a better source of funding than grant funding, because you have a customer that wants it. It's a better source of funding, certainly, than dilutive funding, and it allows you to actually do what you're trying to do, which is deliver value.
I would say in the class three sort of medical device space, because the purchases only come at the very end of all the hard work. I would say one of the most underrated milestones is the ability to attract real knowledge and talent into the team. You have to not take that for granted. When you bring in people that are truly qualified, really experts in their field, that can just advance you so much quicker. And we don't talk about that enough. How to attract the right talent and how to retain them and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say a strategic investor, whether that's a venture fund from a health system, a large medical device company, or a potential future customer, putting investing in you at the earliest stages, but then also more importantly, Yair, I liked your response, being able to actually show that first customer and product market fit is what it's all about.
We all love that first customer, especially people are happy to give us their money, right? There's nothing that feels better than that. So on that note, and Henry, to what you said, right? So what is the one person every technology founder should recruit earlier?
An expert in your field. I think one of the things that a lot of founders maybe worry excessively about is protecting their idea and not talking about it too much, trying to keep things quiet and working quietly on your own. That is, there's value in protecting your IP, but once you filed your IP, talk to people, get experts to weigh in on what you're doing, sort of clarify those blind spots that you might have, provide the validation you need. I would say that's really key.
I would, it's a little cheesy, but I would say a recruiter. I think once you get to the point where you're hiring multiple people at the same time, hiring is just such a significant investment.
Hard.
Hiring's hard, especially when you're trying to get A players. And if you can execute faster on hiring, everything goes faster in your growth. And so as you get into the later stages, bringing on and building out an amazing recruiting function and talent acquisition function is something you will definitely benefit from.
I'm going to say get a great operator. Get somebody who has pulled things off and who can pull things off.
That is true. I do find that as well, right? It's one thing to sort of say, hey, I have an idea, here's a vision, here's a product, but running a company and then keeping the train moving on time is then a complete separate skill set too. I like that. So for folks on the call with us, please enter your questions as we transition to the Q&A. And as to kind of close out the chat, since this is about really the upcoming health tech competition, for someone for someone in the audience who's considering applying this year, what is one thing that perhaps one advice that you would give them that as they think about how they construct their application, what do they emphasize on, and probably looking at maybe what they shouldn't overemphasize on as they start to put their application together.
So just high level advice to anyone that's applying.
Yep.
I mean, I think just really anchor to the future that you're trying to build and the vision for the company, and really establishing the problem, and then very quickly talk about why your team and your product is well positioned to tackle it. If you can do that in 2 to 3 minutes really effectively, you've accomplished more than 99% of startups who are entering pitch competitions.
I would say know why you're entering the competition and what you want from it, because that will help determine the way that you actually present. It's a competition, so it depends on the outcome that you want from it. And so if you're looking for advisors from it, well, then pitch to the advisors that are going to be excited. If you're looking for the VCs that are in the audience, then okay, go for that. If you're looking to recruit somebody that can join you early stage, well, look for somebody that has the domain expertise that can complement what you want, as Jason, Henry, you guys were talking about, right? So know what you want from it as you go into it.
Yeah, and I would say for us, it was really important to win over people's hearts, like really kind of get them to see the problem, really articulate that clearly, and get them to believe in the solution that you're building. And then I agree with Jason, then emphasize the strengths of your team to be able to execute on this.
Awesome. Well, then I'm going to just field a couple questions coming from our audience. First one was really more about, probably I would think about market size. So our audience asked that globally congenital heart disease affect over 1 million patients. Of the 40, but only looks like about 40,000 children born with CHD annually in the US. So, how many specifically require a pulmonary valve replacement versus other congenital defects that don't involve the pulmonary valve? And so the way I interpret this question is really that we get faced this question a lot as entrepreneurs, which is how big is your market? And Henry, you've already alluded that pediatrics is a small market, and it's tough to sort of justify the expense on developing solutions for young kids, even though they're so worthwhile in doing. So really, how do you think about market size, and how have you've already kind of touched on that earlier, but maybe share a little bit more on how you think about market sizing. And actually, in fact, I suspect that that is applicable to anybody, right? So Jason, you've had to answer that question. Why do people need a digital stethoscope, right? What's broken and what needs fixing? And certainly, yeah, you're so early in that clinical decision-making pathway, creating a solution there. So perhaps maybe each of you can just talk about how did you approach a question of market sizing and justifying that this is a good investment and this is a scalable solution that's worthy of investment. So I'll start with you, Henry.
Sure. In our case, the market size for pediatric pulmonary valve replacement is about 1,000 patients per year in the US. So it's not a huge number. But those kids are tremendously impacted. Every time they go through open heart surgery, they're recovering at home for another month. After being in hospital for a week or two, parents are taking time off work for a month or more to take care of their kids because they can't go back to school, things like this. So the impact is huge, but the numbers are small. So the conversations then have to center around how do we mitigate for that small market size? One of them is we are not just coming with an idea. We've de-risked this through grants and all of that so that we're relatively advanced in this. So the amount of investment needed to cross the finish line is less than if we had come just with an idea. So doing a lot of that hard work up front based on grants has been helpful for us. The second point that I would say is emphasizing the smaller amount of investment that's needed to get to the finish line based on the market itself. The market being smaller means that a clinical trial in our case will be about 60 patients to get a full PMA approval of this device. If this were an adult device, it'd be hundreds of patients. It would go on for years. It'd be with a comparison arm, proving non-inferiority to an existing device. There are no existing devices for the small children we're treating. So the clinical trials from our conversations with FDA will be a lot more nimble and less costly. Third, we've emphasized the fact that our device, unlike a lot of devices that come to market that may solve an unmet need and may be better than what's out there, they're also a lot more expensive typically than what's already out there. Our device will be able to come out and be manufactured at way lower cost than hand sewing animal tissues. Typically, it takes about 15 hours to manufacture a single heart valve. But with making it out of a medical grade polymer, as we're doing, we shave the cost of goods sold down tremendously, so increase our margins. So that means that now we can recover some of those costs and be more profitable earlier on in this relatively small market. So that's how we've had those conversations with investors to explain that the small market is not as big an impediment as they might have thought.
Yeah, a big fish in a very small pond is sometimes a great place to be.
Yeah.
So, from our perspective, almost like the opposite, much larger market, but a much lower price point for the actual device. And so there's about 4 million healthcare professionals in the US that use a stethoscope every day, between 4 and 5, about 30 million globally. The goal is to have every auscultation, every stethoscope be digital, and then have kind of varying levels of devices that we offer, and as well as software that are purpose-built for each specialty. And so that's really from a hardware perspective and an individual software perspective. And then there's about 5,000 hospitals, about 800 health systems that are thinking about how do we better detect structural heart disease and low ejection fraction in the community across our primary care patient population, and how do those patients matriculate through to cardiology for diagnosis and interventional cardiology for treatment. And so we think about the market from a B2B perspective or direct to health systems. Who are the integrated delivery networks that are investing in primary care and population health? And how are those patients matriculating through downstream? And so our go-to-market is split between the individual stethoscope buyer and user, and also the health system that are investing in these tools more systematically.
For us at Avo, when I first started Avo, I built it as a solution to my problem. I didn't look at the market. I didn't look at who we can sell to. I looked at, is this something that's going to help me, and is it going to help my friends? Now, as we are continuing to expand and continuing to grow, we try not to confuse a large theoretical market with an accessible one. So we look at four things. The first is, how frequent and painful is the problem? Who actually owns it? Does that person have budget and urgency? And how difficult will it be to change the existing workflow? So we often begin with a specific problem where we can demonstrate value quickly, and then also ask, does solving that earn us the trust, data, and distribution to address adjacent problems? So the real question isn't only how big is this market, it's can we enter through this focused wedge, prove measurable value, and expand from there.
Thank you for that. And I think it's just also so hard to answer to, again, back into, there's a lot of logs, but each of the logs are of different sizes, right? And so which one are you jumping on?
Some of them
and
move
how does that,
faster, some of them are
yeah,
narrower, some of them are long, some of them are next to other logs, 100%.
you got to find the flat ones if you want to be able to play your musical instrument on it as well, right?
I love it.
So as we are coming to the end of the hour, I just want to really thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to have this conversation with me today. So thank you all for sharing your journey, your milestones. And I also want to thank everybody that have joined us to listen to this discussion. What I take away from this conversation is that really winning a competition creates credibility, relationships, and the momentum at a point that's required to get your company through to the next milestone as you're kind of thinking about what your company building journey is. So, as you know, the application window for the next AHA Health Tech competition is now open, and the information has been shared in chat. And I look forward to really seeing a few of you in November at the AHA conference, and hopefully to meet many of you who are on the call there as well. So with that, I will close this call and wish everybody a good Wednesday.
Thanks, Catherine. Good to meet
Thank
everybody.
you so much.
Thank you.